Missing those delicious desserts that used to satisfy your chocolate cravings back in the day? Today, we're bringing back 20 chocolate treats that have faded over time but deserve a place back on the family table. Ever thought of putting mayonnaise on a cake? Well, back in the day, chocolate mayonnaise cake was all the rage. Now, before you wrinkle your nose, hear me out. This cake came into existence when Mrs. Paul, the wife of a Hellmann's sales distributor, used Hellmann's mayonnaise instead of butter for her cake batter. Well, this cake is proof that accidents sometimes lead to beautiful or delicious things. Yep, it melts right into your mouth, thanks to an incredibly moist sponge. There were two famous versions of this mayo cake floating around. The first and older recipe was a chocolate cake with raisins and dates, and the other was just a regular two-layer chocolate cake with whatever frosting you like. This chocolatey goodness slipped away because adding mayonnaise to a cake started sounding a tad bit too bizarre. If you've got a jar of mayo lying around, you know what to whip up. Trust me, you won't taste a hint of mayonnaise in there. The Black Forest cake is a German masterpiece with layers of chocolate cake, tart cherries, whipped cream, and a healthy dose of Kirsch, cherry brandy for adults. This cake was a true showstopper at family gatherings, but it took more time than your average chocolate cake to make. The Germans don't come to play with their recipes. The star of the show has to be the alcoholic spirit that made the cherries sour, giving the cake its signature taste. Other spirits were also sometimes used, such as rum, which was common in Austrian recipes. Well, all good things come to an end, and so did his decadent dessert that has fallen out of favor, possibly because it takes a bit of effort to make. But if you ever get the chance to try it, you'll understand why it ever made it to our list. So, chocolate chiffon cake was a real classic back in the day. What made it so special? This cake was the ultimate two-in-one hybrid with the fluffiness of a sponge cake with the richness of chocolate. The secret to its light texture was beaten egg whites, which were gently folded into the batter. This cake was perfect for days when you wanted a chocolate treat without feeling too full. The best part? The powdered sugar topping that made the cake melt like fluffy clouds in your mouth. This delicious treat originated in California, and the recipe was kept a secret for 20 years until Harry Baker finally sold it and published it for the public in a Betty Crocker pamphlet in 1948. Unfortunately, as other cakes became more popular, everyone just kind of forgot about the delicious chiffon cake. No-bake treats were a lifesaver for busy families, and chocolate haystacks were a favorite. These little no-bake goodies were made with chow mein noodles and melted chocolate. Yep, you heard that right. These cookies are a product of the make-do-with-what-you-have era. The crunchy noodles gave this dessert a unique texture that made it stand out from the rest. They were incredibly easy to make. Just melt the chocolate, mix in the noodles, and drop spoonfuls onto a baking sheet to set. The kids loved this one in the 90s, and they were a hit at parties and school events. These ones really need to make a grand re-entry, don't they? The chocolate icebox cake screams nostalgia like no other. This dessert was a staple for many families, especially during the hot summer months when turning on the oven was not an option. We're talking about layers of chocolate wafers and whipped cream stacked and chilled in the fridge. But the true magic happened when you let it sit in the icebox overnight. That's where the name comes from. The wafers absorbed the moisture from the cream, which almost gave it a cake-like texture without any baking. This one was a hit across the globe. Australia, Philippines, United Kingdom, America, you name it. Sadly, this one just went out of style, but I think the weather has really been calling for this one to make a comeback. Don't you think? A rolled chocolate sponge cake filled with cream. What's not to love? The chocolate roll was a fan favorite all the way from Europe, also known as the Swiss roll. This delicious treat was a thin sponge cake filled with icing, whipped cream, jam, or pretty much any filling you can possibly imagine. The chocolate roll was considered a sophisticated dessert, which made it perfect for fancy tea parties. There was a different version of this in almost every country you can name, and Japan even filled it with fruits like strawberries sometimes. It was a fan favorite. However, as other easier-to-make desserts gained popularity, the chocolate roll began to fade away. But those who remember it still hold a special place in their hearts for this chocolatey goodness. The Mississippi mud pie was a chocolate lover's dream, rich, gooey, and full of fudge. This wasn't your grandma's good old pecan pie. This delicious treat featured a chocolate crust and a fudgy filling and was often topped with whipped cream or even more chocolate. But the graham cracker crust was definitely the star of the show. As the name suggests, this cake was created in Mississippi as a variant of the plain mud cake. Some different versions also include marshmallows, pecans, walnuts, pudding, or even liquor. It made all the buzz in the 1980s and was a hit at the kids' table. So why did it vanish from our tables? Well, as lighter desserts became more popular, the Mississippi mud pie became nothing more than a part of history. The chocolate sauerkraut cake was a showstopper back in the day. Now, I know what you're thinking. Sauerkraut in a cake? I've got to be kidding, right? Well, don't knock it till you try it. The sauerkraut added moisture and a slight tang to the cake, which balanced out the sweetness of the chocolate. Plus, once baked, the sauerkraut became almost undetectable, leaving behind the chocolate cake of our dreams. The big question remains, who decided to put sauerkraut in chocolate cake? The year was 1965, and bakers decided to make a cake that kept everyone guessing. No one could figure out the secret ingredient that gave this cake its tanginess. The Depression era was all about adding whatever you could find to your chocolate cakes. This dessert died down because this weird combination didn't sit right with people as the world kept progressing. But hey, if you ever dare to try this one, you're welcome. Everything's bigger in Texas, and that includes their sheet cake. The Texas sheet cake was a large, thin chocolate cake topped with a poured chocolate icing. It was perfect for feeding a crowd back when the wallets were a bit tighter for most folks. The cake was incredibly moist and rich, and the icing was often made with cocoa, butter, and pecans, which made it easy to whip out in a short amount of time. Think fudgy brownies in cake form. The craziest part? This used to be a staple at funerals. This treat was also a hit at churches, which gave it the name of church lady cake. Now it was mostly a crowd pleaser, but you can have it all for yourself too. We don't judge here. Since more sophisticated desserts like cinnamon rolls and tiramisu entered the chat, the Texas sheet cake couldn't keep up and faded away. Speaking of tough times, the chocolate depression cake was one of the best inventions of the Depression era. So, what makes this one so special? Well, you can bake this one without any eggs, milk, or butter. I'm all ears. Despite its humble beginnings, this cake was a delicious treat that was not only tasty, but also budget-friendly. Name a better combo, I'll wait. This cake was also called the poor man's cake, and a fancier version had raisins as toppings. It has been declared to be the most worthwhile cake ever made. The Depression era is gone, and so is the chocolate depression cake. This cake was a great example of great things being born in tough times. If you love a good brownie, you would love the chocolate cream cheese brownies, which took everyone's favorite treat to the next level. Imagine rich, fudgy chocolate brownie batter swirled with creamy cheesecake filling. The origin of these brownies is somewhat disputed, but most culinary historians agree that brownies were first created in the United States in the late 19th century. This two-in-one dessert was a staple at bake sales, parties, or even a simple treat at home. You know those days when you can't decide between a brownie or a cheesecake? Well, the chocolate cream cheese brownie was your answer. Some variations include adding additional flavors like raspberry, pumpkin, or caramel to the cream cheese layer. Others contain different types of chocolate, such as white chocolate or dark chocolate. So why did this one leave us so soon? Some things are just not meant to stay forever, and the chocolate cream cheese brownie was one of them. Potatoes in a cake? Believe it or not, chocolate potato cake was a thing, and it was delicious. The mashed potatoes added incredible moisture and texture to the cake, which made it wonderfully soft and rich. And before you start wondering, no, the potatoes didn't affect the taste, they just made the cake better. The chocolate potato cake first came into existence in the 1930s and became famous in parts of the United States and Ireland. This was a popular dessert in times when people had to make do with what they had, and it became an instant hit. Potatoes were common, cheap, and available at all times. It was a great way to use leftover mashed potatoes or sneak some veggies into a dessert, as long as you don't tell the kids. If you're ever bored and craving a crazy treat, you know what to make. Chocolate beet cake was another creative way to sneak veggies and add a bit of nutrition to a chocolate cake. Beets added natural sweetness and moisture, creating a dense and flavorful cake. And don't even get me started on the beautiful red hue it added to the batter. The history of chocolate beet cake is often linked to wartime periods, particularly World War II, when food rationing was common. Yep, this cake came all the way from Europe and was very popular around the time when beetroot was abundant. This cake is proof that cake can be healthy too. All you need to do is add beet to it. Now, this cake began to disappear as soon as people caught on to the secret vegetable in it. Yeah, the taste must be delicious, but chocolate and beet don't really sound appetizing together, do they? However, this one survived the war, and that has got to mean something. We shouldn't let it slip by this easily. If you thought beet in a cake was bizarre, wait till you hear about the chocolate zucchini cake. This cake was a popular way to use up the extra summer squash. This treat originated in the mid-20th century in Florida and made waves around the world. So how did we even reach the point of adding zucchini to the cake? Well, the story starts with a bored garden owner with chocolate cake batter and a whole lot of zucchini. You know what happens when people get bored? You mix everything in sight, and this accident resulted in a dessert that made our childhoods memorable. It was a staple in cookbooks in the 1980s, but slowly started to fade away in the 2000s. You can't find this one in bakeries, but hey, it's never too late to dust off your grandma's cookbooks, is it? The black bottom pie takes the cake for being one of the most fanciest desserts on the list. I'm sure you remember this one. This pie is made of a chocolate custard base with a graham cracker crust topped with a layer of vanilla cream. Sounds pretty classic, right? But trust me, this one's even better than it sounds. The bottom in the name refers to the chocolate that sinks during baking. Black bottom pie is of southern origin, with the black bottom representing the dark, swampy lowlands along the Mississippi River. It became a hit in Thanksgiving dinners during the early 1940s in Oklahoma City. This pie may have disappeared from our dinner tables, but it will always have a deep place in our hearts. I say we sign a petition to bring this one back. The name says it all. Chocolate velvet cake was a rich and smooth dessert that melted in your mouth. This dessert was like the Gucci of all cakes, luxurious like no other. Now, this one was all about the texture, combining the deep, luxurious flavor of chocolate with a tender, velvety crumb. Now, the cake's origins are somewhat murky, but it became all the rage in mid-20th century America. You really couldn't have elegant dinners or special occasions without chocolate velvet cake making an appearance. But you know how the world works. Everything evolves, desserts did too. Chocolate velvet cake was replaced with the infamous red velvet cake. I'm not complaining, but hear me out. I think there is room for both of them on our dinner table. You gotta let this one make a comeback and take the center stage again. It's too good to be forgotten. Remember those bumpy cakes from bake sales? I know they sound old-fashioned now, but they were everything back in the day. We're talking featured a unique cake that bumps of buttercream frosting covered in a rich chocolate ganache, creating a bumpy texture on top, which gave this dessert its playful name. It was created by Sanders Confectionery of Detroit, Michigan in the early 1900s and was known as the Sanders Devil's Food Buttercream Cake when it was first introduced. I'm glad they came up with another name for it down the line. Sanders Confectionery makes the original trademarked bumpy cake, but other companies have attempted to use this trademarked name many times during the cake's 100-year-plus history. You know what that means? You can still find it at vintage candy stores. I just read the expiration date twice before eating it. Chocolate raspberry cake was the perfect combination of rich chocolate and tart raspberries. Hear me out. There's no combination like chocolate and raspberries. This power duo is all you need to satisfy those Tuesday night chocolate cravings. Now, this cake often featured layers of chocolate cake filled with raspberry preserves or fresh raspberries, and it was topped with a chocolate ganache or buttercream. It was hit during the summer months when raspberries were in season. This dessert dates way back to the Mesoamerican civilizations, where cacao was first cultivated. So if you ever want to thank anyone for this heavenly combination, thank the Aztecs and Mayans. Fast forward to Europe in the 16th century, it became a luxury item. You can say this one ran its course with the rise of cupcakes, but it'll surely never be forgotten. Remember the chocolate Jell-O cake? This dessert is like a warm hug from the past. This cake was an easy fix to your summer chocolate treats with the convenience of just a cake box mix and good old gelatin. The cake was made by poking holes in a baked chocolate cake and then pouring prepared chocolate gelatin over it. The gelatin seeped into the cake, which created the moist, jiggly texture that everyone loved. The best part? You could add any flavored Jell-O you wanted. Banana, strawberry, mango, you name it. You could also top it off with whipped cream or frosting. This cake was a hit at birthday parties and potlucks during the 1970s and 1980s. But as tastes shifted, the Jell-O cake became a distant memory. Hear me out. The kids these days would love this one. I think we should bring this one back for the fun of it. Creme brulee is a popular French dessert, but did you know there's a chocolate version? Chocolate creme brulee gave your classic rich, creamy custard the only thing it was missing: chocolate. It was topped with the signature caramelized sugar crust. This dessert was a hit in fancy restaurants and at elegant dinner parties. Now, creme brulee has been around for longer than you can imagine. The earliest known recipe appears in François Massielot's 1691 cookbook, Cuisinier Royal et Bourgeois, but for all we know, it could have been around during the time of the Egyptian civilization. The chocolate flavor gained attention in the 20th century, but as the original creme brulee made a comeback, everyone kind of forgot about the chocolatey twist. This dessert was pure culinary joy and will remain unforgettable for all times to come. So did any of these chocolate desserts stir up tasty memories? If so, like this video, click subscribe, and stay tuned for more nostalgia trips.